Now you point in the book, you point to the importance of actively changing moral values to achieve a better future for humankind. So, which of today's widespread moral values would you say would need to change?
So, I think the biggest things are, you can think of it as expanding our sphere of moral concern, where at the moment people's values are often very parochial. So, we care about our families and we care to some extent about people in the same nation as ourselves. But I think that we should care equally about everyone all around the world. Like, everyone has an equal right to a good life. I also think we should care much more than we do about non-human animals. So at the moment, almost 100 billion animals, land animals, are killed every year for food. And the vast majority of them are factory farmed, kept in horrific suffering. That should just not be acceptable. And then more generally, I just think is concern for the disenfranchised and the hidden away. So prisoners, for example, I mean, it's a bigger issue in the United States, but there are literally millions of people who are imprisoned for months or years, taken away from their families for non-violent drug offenses. And that, again, is something, they don't get a lot of sympathy because criminals are demonized. But I think we will look back in the future, if things go well, and regard that as an abomination too.
Yeah. But I mean, these values that you're talking about, and I agree. I mean, we should be better at thinking about everybody else and about animals and all that. But it used to be even worse, didn't it?
I agree. Yeah.
So it has happened a lot, and people tend to. I mean, there are a lot of young people and people my own age who don't eat meat because of that, and all kinds of.
Yeah. So I do think we've seen, in many ways, tremendous moral progress over the last couple of centuries. So feminist movement, abolition, civil rights movements, just wonderful steps forward in terms of moral progress. On animals, I think we've seen regress, ultimately. Okay. So people now say they care more. But the amount of animal suffering that we inflict
because we don't see it.
Because we don't see it, exactly. It's hidden away. Far greater than it ever was in the past. And then, even if the trend has overall been positive, there's no guarantee of that. In the early 20th century, we saw fascist movements arising out of democracies. There really can be moral regress, and we shouldn't at all be complacent that, we're all going to figure it out and things will be okay, just as long as we don't avoid catastrophe. It requires work from thinkers, from advocates, from activists to ensure that we do move.
So who is going to push for that, and how is it going to happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon all of us, where there are, researchers, thinkers, people who can try and kind of push the moral status quo and give arguments for ideas that might sound absurd at the time, in the way that the abolition of slavery or the idea that women should have a right to vote, would have sounded absurd in the past. There are roles for journalists and writers to cover some of these issues. I mean, 5,000 children died today. Did that make the news? No, because it happens every day. But I think that should get much more coverage than it does. And there are also just, this is again something that everyone can do. We now have, access to social media. We can spread messages much further than we could before. And so being someone who is in a very sensible, careful, responsible way, trying to promote people to reflect and think morally and reflect on some of their choices can be a powerful piece of advocacy.
Yeah. But do you think that talking about the abolitionist movement, for instance, which is salient in the book, do you think that the reason that happened, that slavery ended, was because a relatively small number of people wanted to end it? Or was it rather that it was something in the collective unconscious, if you will, that had changed, that had happened, so that it would have happened anyway? So, because I tend to think that was the case, but I think you're arguing for the case that it actually was an active choice by a few people.
So I think there's 3 possible explanations. Yeah. So one I reject entirely. So one that people often think is this was just a result of economic forces that made slavery unprofitable. It just didn't make sense because of increased mechanization. automation. I think this has just been definitively refuted, essentially, by historical scholarship. The price of slaves was increasing, the profitability of slave plantations was increasing at the point of time of abolition. It was enormously expensive for the British Empire to abolish slavery when it did. It really looks, and this is like the consensus.
That was an interesting piece of news, actually, that it cost the British government so much.
2% of British GDP for 60 years, much more than we spend on foreign aid today in percentage terms. That's really quite well accepted among historians, that it's a matter of cultural change rather than economic change, though obviously there's mixings. The second question is harder, which is how broad a cultural change. So certainly there was a more general move towards democratization, liberalization, appeal of free markets. Was the abolition of slavery more or less inevitable given those changes? And there, I don't know.
After all, Enlightenment had happened before, not so long before that.
Exactly, yeah. So it was certainly part of that general trend. I'm not sure that makes the abolition of slavery inevitable, though, because moral inconsistency can persist for a very long time, where, we have these enlightened egalitarian views, yet we let thousands of children die who we could help every single day. Yet we have often, quite horrible attitudes to people who've been imprisoned for nonviolent offences, or people of other from other countries and so on. And so it doesn't. So yeah, I definitely think it helped for sure, and maybe made it inevitable, but I'm not confident.